The crack of a gunshot echoed across Willow Creek's dusty Main Street, but it wasn't this familiar sound that caught Killian Zane's attention. It was the jeering crowd gathering outside Miller's general store. Through the sea of worn Stetsons and weathered faces, he glimpsed a woman with copper hair being pushed into the center of a cruel circle, her dress torn at the shoulder and tears cutting clean lines through the dust on her face. It was 1876, and the West had little mercy for anyone who broke its unwritten rules. Killian adjusted his worn leather holster, squinting against the harsh midday sun. At 32, he'd seen enough of humanity's cruelty to last several lifetimes. The hard years working cattle drives from Texas to Kansas had left permanent lines around his eyes, but they hadn't hardened his heart the way they had for many men who rode the trails. "Thief!" shouted Miller, the stout shopkeeper, holding up a small tin of peaches. "Caught her red-handed, slipping this into her pocket," the woman Willow Nash, though Killian didn't know her name yet, kept her eyes downcast, her slender shoulders trembling but her spine remarkably straight. "My brother is sick," she said, her voice barely audible above the crowd's muttering. "He hasn't eaten in 2 days." Someone spat in the dirt near her feet. Another voice called out, "Should cut off her hand, like they do to thieves down in Mexico." Killian had been in town less than a day, intending only to restock supplies before heading north to Montana Territory, where he'd heard a man could still claim enough land to start his own ranch. He had no business interfering in local matters, no reason to care about a woman he'd never met. But something in the proud way she held herself, despite her humiliation, stirred something forgotten inside him. He pushed through the crowd with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to making space for himself in the world. The onlookers parted, perhaps sensing the quiet danger that had kept Killian alive through 15 years on the frontier. "That's enough," he said, his voice low but carrying across the suddenly quieter gathering. He reached the inner circle and stood beside the woman, taking in her startled green eyes and the small, almost invisible freckles across her nose. Miller puffed up his chest. "This ain't your concern, stranger. I'm making it my concern." Killian pulled out a silver dollar and flipped it toward the shopkeeper. "That should cover the peaches and whatever else the lady needs." Miller caught the coin reflexively but narrowed his eyes. "She's a thief." "Needs to be taught. She's mine now," Killian interrupted, taking the woman's cold hand in his calloused one. He turned to face her directly, his expression softening just enough for her to see he meant no harm. "Isn't that right, darlin'?" For a moment, confusion clouded her eyes, followed by wariness, and then, as understanding dawned, a flicker of desperate relief. She gave a small nod. "My wife's been waiting for me to arrive," Killian continued smoothly, addressing the crowd. "Been delayed by work. Seems she's fallen on hard times while I was away." He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Let's get you home." Without waiting for further response, he guided her through the parting crowd, his other hand resting casually near his holster, a silent warning that following them would be unwise. They walked in tense silence until they'd turned the corner onto a quieter street lined with cottonwoods. "You can let go now," she said softly, though she made no move to pull her hand away. Killian released her immediately. "My apologies, madam. Didn't see another way to get you out of there." "No apology needed." She rubbed her wrist where Miller had grabbed her. "I'm Willow Nash, Killian Zane." He tipped his hat slightly. "Is there really a sick brother?" Her green eyes hardened. "Yes, Thomas. He's 14 and has the fever bad. We lost our parents 6 months ago to the same sickness that's got him now." She hesitated. I've never stolen anything before today." Killian nodded, believing her without question. "Where are you staying?" "A room behind the laundry. Mrs. Chen lets me work there in exchange." "Let me help you get what your brother needs," he said, surprising himself with the offer. Willow studied him suspiciously. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." Killian considered this, looking down the dusty street toward the mountains in the distance. "Maybe I'm tired of riding past people who need help." A slight, cautious smile touched her lips. "Most men I've met out here ride toward trouble, not toward helping." "Then you've been meeting the wrong kind of men, Miss Nash." He didn't know then that these words, spoken casually on a hot afternoon in a forgettable frontier town, would alter the course of his carefully planned life. Nor did he realize that the woman watching him with guarded hope in her eyes would soon become the only thing in his world worth fighting for. "Come on," he said. "Let's get those peaches for your brother, and maybe some real medicine too." Willow hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Thank you, Mr. Zane." "Killian," he corrected. "Killian," she repeated softly, as if testing how the name felt on her tongue. Together they walked back toward the main street, unaware they were being watched by several pairs of unfriendly eyes. Willow led Killian to a small, weathered building behind Wang's laundry. The single room she shared with her brother was neat despite its obvious poverty. A thin boy lay on a pallet in the corner, his face flushed with fever. "Thomas," Willow called softly, kneeling beside her brother. "I've brought medicine and something to eat." The boy's eyes fluttered open, focusing with difficulty. When he noticed Killian standing in the doorway, he tried to sit up. "Easy there," Killian said, stepping forward. "Your sister went to considerable trouble to get you these peaches." Thomas looked questioningly at his sister, who was opening the tin. "Who's he?" he asked weakly. "This is Mr. Zane," Willow explained, helping her brother take a sip of the sweet syrup from the peaches. "He helped me at the store." She didn't elaborate, and Killian appreciated her discretion. No boy needed to know his sister had nearly been branded a thief in public. "I also brought this," Killian said, producing a small bottle from his saddlebag. "Willow bark tincture. Army doctor I knew swore by it for fevers." Willow looked up, surprise evident in her expression. "That's expensive medicine," Killian shrugged. "Had it for emergencies. This seems like one." While Willow administered the medicine, Killian took stock of their situation. The room contained little more than the pallet. A small table with one chair, a trunk presumably holding their belongings, and a tiny pot-bellied stove that served for both cooking and heat. "How long have you been in Willow Creek?" he asked. "Since spring," she replied, wiping her brother's forehead with a damp cloth. "We were heading to California, but the wagon train left without us when Thomas first got sick." Killian frowned. "Decent people wouldn't leave a sick boy behind." "Decent people are scarce when cholera might be involved," Willow said without bitterness. "It wasn't cholera, thank God, just a bad inflammation of the lungs. But by then, they were gone." Thomas had drifted back to sleep, his breathing a little less labored than before. "You should get some rest too," Killian suggested. "I'll fetch some proper food." Willow stood, pushing a stray copper lock behind her ear. "You've done enough already." "Hardly." He moved toward the door. "I'll be back shortly." Before she could protest further, he was gone, his tall frame disappearing around the corner. True to his word, Killian returned an hour later with a basket containing freshly baked bread, a jar of honey dried beef, and a small sack of coffee beans. He'd also acquired a chicken, already plucked and ready for cooking. "This is too much," Willow protested when she saw what he'd brought. "The boy needs strength to fight off that fever," Killian replied simply. "And so do you." He watched as she efficiently set about preparing a broth, her movements practiced despite her obvious exhaustion. In the better light of evening, he noticed the dark circles under her eyes and how thin her wrists were. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" he asked quietly. She paused, knife in hand, I manage. That's not what I asked, Willow sighed. I make sure Thomas eats first. The laundry work doesn't pay much, just our room. And before that, you mentioned your parents passed. A shadow crossed her face. 6 months ago. Influenza took them both within a week of each other. We had a small farm outside of Springfield, Missouri. Long way from Missouri to California, she nodded. Father always talked about going west. After he died, there wasn't much reason to stay. The bank took the farm. Her voice hardened. They didn't even wait for the funeral. Killian had heard similar stories too many times. The war had ended 11 years ago, but its aftermath still rippled through people's lives, particularly in border states like Missouri. Your folks picked the wrong side, he asked carefully. She glanced at him sharply. They didn't pick any side, just tried to keep their heads down and farm their land. Her shoulders sagged slightly. But people remembered my father treated wounded men regardless of their uniform. Some called him a sympathizer. Killian nodded, understanding. The war might be over on paper, but not in people's hearts. Not yet. Where were you headed before all this? Willow asked, clearly wanting to change the subject. Montana Territory. Heard there's still good land available for those willing to work it. Is that what you want? Your own ranch? Killian considered. Been working other men's cattle long enough. Figure it's time I built something of my own. That sounds nice, she said softly, stirring the broth. A place of your own. They fell into comfortable silence as she continued preparing the meal. When the food was ready, she gently woke Thomas, who seemed stronger after his rest. The boy ate cautiously at first, then with increasing appetite. This is real good, sis, he said between spoonfuls. Thank Mr. Zane, she replied. He brought everything. Thomas looked at Killian with curious eyes. Are you courting my sister, Thomas? Willow exclaimed, her cheeks flushing. Killian couldn't help but smile. Just being neighborly, son. Well, if you did want to court her, the boy continued stubbornly, I wouldn't mind. She works too hard. That's enough, Willow said firmly. Finish your broth. Later, after Thomas had fallen asleep again, Killian rose to leave. I've taken a room at the Frontier Hotel, he said. I'll check on you both tomorrow if that's all right. Willow walked him to the door. Why are you doing this, really? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Killian considered his answer carefully. When I saw you in that crowd today, standing tall despite everything, it reminded me there's still dignity in this world. That's worth protecting. Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment he thought she might say more. Instead, she simply nodded. Thank you, she said, for everything. Get some rest, Willow, he replied, stepping out into the cool night air. As he walked back to his hotel, Killian tried to convince himself that his sudden concern for the Nash siblings was merely a temporary detour, that he'd be back on the trail to Montana within days. But something about Willow's green eyes and quiet strength had settled into his thoughts in a way he hadn't experienced before. He was still pondering this when he entered the hotel lobby and noticed 3 men at a corner table watching him with unconcealed interest. One was Miller, the shopkeeper. The other 2 were strangers, but their type was familiar enough: hard men with cold eyes and gunbelts worn low. Killian nodded curtly in their direction before heading upstairs. Their scrutiny confirmed what he already suspected. His impulsive actions at the market had drawn unwanted attention. In a small town like Willow Creek, strangers who interfered in local matters rarely went unnoticed. He checked his Colt revolver before settling in for the night, a habit formed over years of sleeping in territories where law was more concept than reality. As he drifted toward sleep, his last thoughts were not of potential trouble but of copper hair and determined green eyes. Morning arrived with the distant sound of a freight wagon rumbling into town and roosters announcing the dawn. Killian woke early, as was his custom, and made his way downstairs to the hotel's small dining room. The same 3 men from the previous night occupied a table near the window, their conversation stopping abruptly when he entered. Ignoring them, Killian ordered coffee and a plate of eggs with salt pork. As he ate, he considered his options. His original plan had been straightforward: resupply in Willow Creek, then continue north before winter made mountain travel treacherous. Now, with the Nash siblings in the equation, things were more complicated. Thomas needed time to recover fully before undertaking any journey, especially with autumn approaching. And Willow clearly couldn't manage alone much longer, working herself to exhaustion while caring for her brother. His thoughts were interrupted when one of the men from the corner table approached. He was tall and lean, with a face weathered by sun and hard living. A star-shaped badge gleamed dully on his vest. "Morning," the man said. "Sheriff Leland Drake, mind if I join you?" Killian gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Free country." Drake sat, studying Killian with shrewd eyes. Passing through or planning to stay a while, hadn't decided yet. The sheriff nodded slowly. "Heard about what happened at Miller's yesterday, taking up with the Nash girl." "Is that how people see it?" Killian asked mildly, taking a sip of his coffee. "People see what they want to see." Drake leaned forward slightly. "But I like to know who's in my town, especially men who wear their guns like they know how to use them." Killian met the sheriff's gaze evenly. "Done nothing against the law, Sheriff. Not saying you have. Yet." Drake drummed his fingers on the table. "But Miller's not just a shopkeeper. He's also the mayor's cousin and owns half the businesses on Main Street, including the laundry where Miss Nash works." A flicker of surprise crossed Drake's face. "You catch on quick." "Yes, including that." "Appreciate the warning," Killian said, finishing his coffee. "Not a warning, just information." Drake stood. "Town's peaceful, like to keep it that way." After the sheriff returned to his table, Killian paid for his meal and headed out. The morning air was crisp, hinting at the changing season. He made his way to the livery stable to check on his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper that had carried him faithfully for 3 years. "Morning, Copper," he greeted, running a hand along the horse's neck. "Might be staying a bit longer than planned." The horse nickered softly in response, nudging Killian's pocket for treats. "Getting spoiled," Killian chuckled, producing a dried apple slice from his pocket. As he groomed Copper, Killian considered what the sheriff had told him. If Miller had influence over Willow's employment, her situation was even more precarious than he'd thought. The man might not be satisfied with the public humiliation he'd already inflicted. With this concern in mind, Killian headed to Wung's laundry earlier than he'd planned. The shop was already busy, steam rising from large tubs where several women worked, their sleeves rolled up and hair tied back from their perspiring faces. He spotted Willow at the far end, scrubbing vigorously at what appeared to be a miner's shirt. Even in the harsh environment of the laundry, there was grace in her movements, a determined efficiency that spoke of her character. When she noticed him, surprise and something else, pleasure, perhaps, flickered across her face before she quickly composed herself. "Mr. Zane," she acknowledged, continuing her work. "Didn't expect to see you so early." "Thought I'd check on your brother," he replied. "And you?" She glanced toward a small Asian woman directing operations from behind a counter. "I can't stop working now. Mrs. Chen is already short-handed." "I understand. When do you finish?" "Noon, usually. Then again from 2 until 6. Killian nodded. "I'll come back at noon then." "Is there anything Thomas needs?" Willow hesitated, clearly uncomfortable asking for more help. "He's better this morning. The medicine helped." "Good to hear. I'll stop by your place shortly after 12. As he turned to leave, he noticed Mrs. Chen watching their interaction with interest. He nodded politely in her direction before exiting. Outside, Killian decided to use the morning productively. He visited the general store, deliberately choosing the competitor to Miller's, and purchased additional supplies: flour, sugar, more coffee, dried fruit, and a small bag of hard candies for Thomas. The shopkeeper, an elderly man named Perkins, was considerably more welcoming than Miller had been. "You the fella who helped the Nash girl yesterday?" Perkins asked as he wrapped the purchases. Killian nodded cautiously. The old man smiled, revealing a gap where 2 front teeth should have been. "Good on you. That Miller's always been a mean one. Charging folks double if they ain't got cash on hand, then crying theft when they can't pay his inflated prices. Sounds like he's not well loved." Perkins snorted. "Feared, not loved. Him and his cousin, the mayor, run this town like their personal kingdom." He lowered his voice. "Word is they're squeezing out smaller businesses to sell the land to the railroad." This information added another dimension to Killian's understanding of the situation. If Miller was involved in land speculation, his treatment of Willow might have been motivated by more than simple meanness. "The laundry," Killian said. "Is that property valuable?" "Prime location," Perkins confirmed. "Right where the station would likely go." Killian thanked the man for the information and headed next to the doctor's office. The town physician, Dr. Garrett, was a surprisingly young man with spectacles and a serious demeanor. "Willow bark is fine for mild fevers," he said after Killian described Thomas's condition. "But if it's the lung inflammation returning, he might need stronger treatment. I could stop by this afternoon." "Appreciate it, Doc. The family's had a rough time." Dr. Garrett nodded sympathetically. "I treated their father back in Missouri. Good man, taught me a few things about field surgery." He sighed. "Shame how they've been treated here." Killian raised an eyebrow. "You knew them before?" "Graduated medical college with James Nash. We corresponded occasionally." The doctor removed his spectacles, cleaning them with a handkerchief. "When I heard his children had arrived in town, I offered help, but they're proud, especially Willow." This new connection surprised Killian. "Small world, smaller than we think." Dr. Garrett replaced his glasses. "I'll bring some proper medicine for the boy, no charge." By the time noon approached, Killian had a clearer picture of both the Nash family and the town's dynamics. He waited outside the laundry, watching as women filed out for their midday break. Willow emerged last, looking exhausted but brightening slightly when she saw him. "You really came back," she said, sounding genuinely surprised. "Said I would, didn't I?" He handed her one of the packages from Perkins' store. "Some things for lunch." She accepted it with a grateful nod. "Thomas was asking about you this morning. He seems much stronger." They walked together toward her room, Willow occasionally greeting other townspeople who passed. Some responded warmly, others with obvious reserve. Killian noted every reaction, building a mental map of allies and potential problems. Thomas was indeed sitting up when they arrived, his color much improved from the previous day. "Mr. Zane," he exclaimed. "I told Willow you'd come back." "Sharp kid," Killian remarked to Willow. "And it's just Killian, remember." While Willow prepared a simple meal from the supplies he'd brought, Killian sat with Thomas, who proved to be both intelligent and curious despite his weakened state. "Were you in the war, sir?" the boy asked. "Thomas, that's not polite to ask," Willow called from the stove. "It's all right," Killian assured her. "Yes, I was. Confederate cavalry last 2 years. Was barely older than you when I joined up." "Our pa treated soldiers from both sides," Thomas said proudly. "Said a man in pain is just a man, no matter what color coat he wears." Killian nodded. "Sounds like a wise man, your father." He was the best doctor in the county, Thomas continued. Taught Willow lots about medicine, too. Killian glanced at Willow, who was focused intently on her cooking. Is that so? She doesn't like talking about it, Thomas whispered conspiratorially. Says women doctors aren't proper. Thomas, that's enough, Willow said firmly, bringing over plates of food. Mr. Zane doesn't need to hear our entire history. As they ate, Killian mentioned Dr. Garrett's planned visit. Willow nearly dropped her fork. You spoke to Harold, Dr. Garrett? She asked. He mentioned knowing your father, Killian replied carefully. Offered to bring medicine. A complex emotion crossed Willow's face. That's very kind of him. Thomas looked between them, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. Is Dr. Garrett coming here? He's nice. Gave me candy once. Yes, he's coming to check on you, Willow said, composing herself, and we'll thank him properly for his time. After they finished eating, Thomas tired quickly and lay back down for a nap. Willow led Killian outside to talk without disturbing her brother. You've been busy this morning, she observed once they were alone. Getting a feel for the town, he acknowledged. Seems Miller and the mayor have quite a grip on things. Willow's expression hardened. That's putting it mildly. The laundry property, it's valuable to them, isn't it? She looked at him sharply. You really have been asking questions. It's what keeps me alive. He leaned against the wall of the building. Railroad's coming, and they want that land. Willow sighed, pushing back a strand of copper hair that had escaped her simple bun. Mrs. Chen has been fighting them for months. They've tried everything, raising her taxes, sending away her customers, even threatening her family back in San Francisco. And you got caught in the middle. I needed the work, she said simply. And Mrs. Chen needed someone who wasn't afraid of Miller's threats. Killian studied her with newfound respect. You took the job knowing it might cause trouble. It was the only one available to a woman traveling alone with a sick brother. Her green eyes met his directly. I don't have the luxury of many choices, Mr. Zane. Killian, he corrected automatically. A small smile touched her lips. Killian. The way she said his name stirred something in his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. I should get back to work, she said, breaking the moment. Mrs. Chen is already short-handed with one of the girls out sick. I'll stay with Thomas until you return, Killian offered. Dr. Garrett should be by soon anyway. Willow hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and practicality. That's very kind, but no need to worry about my reputation, he said with a wry smile. It's been questionable for years. This earned a genuine laugh from her, a sound so unexpected and lovely that Killian found himself wanting to hear it again. Very well, she conceded, but only until Dr. Garrett arrives. After she left, Killian checked on Thomas, who was sleeping peacefully, then settled into the room's single chair. He removed his revolver, checking it methodically before replacing it in its holster, another habit from years on the trail. He was just beginning to wonder if he should look for something to read when there was a knock at the door. Expecting Dr. Garrett, he was surprised to find Sheriff Drake instead. Afternoon, Drake said, his eyes taking in Killian's presence in the Nash quarters with obvious interest. Getting comfortable, I see. Miss Nash is working. I'm watching her brother until the doctor arrives. Drake nodded slowly. Mighty neighborly of you. Mind if I come in? Killian stepped aside, allowing the sheriff to enter. Drake glanced at the sleeping Thomas before turning his attention back to Killian. Heard you've been asking questions around town, he said without preamble. About Miller, the mayor, the railroad. Just getting to know the place. Uh-huh. Drake removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair. You planning to stay in Willow Creek, Zane? Considering it. The sheriff's expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened slightly. Town's got a delicate balance. Outsiders sometimes upset that. Sounds like maybe it needs upsetting, Drake sighed. Let me be plain. Miller wants the Nash girl gone, says she's trouble. Mayor agrees. Because she works for Mrs. Chen, Killian asked, though he already knew the answer. That's part of it. Drake replaced his hat. There's also the matter of her father's reputation. Some folks haven't forgotten which side he treated during the war. The war's been over for 11 years. Not for everyone. Drake moved toward the door. Just thought you should know what you're stepping into. Miller's not a man who forgets a slight. After the sheriff left, Killian pondered this new information. The situation was more complicated than he'd initially believed. Old war grudges combined with railroad money made for dangerous politics in a small town. Dr. Garrett arrived shortly afterward, his medical bag in hand. He examined Thomas thoroughly, listening to his chest with a stethoscope and checking his throat and eyes. The inflammation is subsiding, he announced, but he's still weak, needs proper nourishment and rest. He handed Killian a small bottle. This tonic will help. 3 drops in water morning and night. How long until he's strong enough to travel? Killian asked. The doctor considered. At least 2 weeks, maybe more. Where were you thinking of going? Montana, eventually. But I'm reconsidering my timeline. Dr. Garrett nodded thoughtfully. If you're staying because of them, you should know the situation here is precarious, especially for Willow. Because of Miller, the mayor, old prejudices. The doctor closed his bag, and other complications. Such as, Dr. Garrett hesitated. That's for Willow to explain if she chooses. This cryptic response only heightened Killian's curiosity, but he respected the doctor's discretion. Fair enough. After the doctor left, Killian sat with Thomas, who had awakened during the examination and was now eager for company. Tell me about being a cowboy, the boy requested, eyes bright with interest despite his illness. Killian spent the next hour sharing carefully edited tales of cattle drives and frontier towns, omitting the more dangerous or unsavory aspects of his experiences. Thomas proved to be an excellent audience, asking intelligent questions and laughing at Killian's occasional attempts at humor. By the time Willow returned from her afternoon shift, an easy camaraderie had developed between Killian and her brother. He's been telling me about the time he had to swim across the Red River during a flood to rescue a calf, Thomas announced excitedly. Said the current was so strong it nearly carried him to New Orleans. Slight exaggeration, Killian admitted with a smile. Willow looked between them, a mix of emotions playing across her face. Sounds like you've been entertaining each other well. Mr. Killian says he might teach me to ride when I'm stronger, Thomas continued enthusiastically. Did he now? Willow raised an eyebrow at Killian. If it's all right with you, Killian added quickly, and only when the doctor says he's ready. We'll see, she replied, but her tone was warm rather than dismissive. Dr. Garrett came by, said Thomas is improving but needs at least 2 weeks of rest before traveling. Willow nodded, setting down her shawl. That's what I expected. She turned to her brother. How are you feeling now? Much better, Thomas assured her, especially after the doctor's medicine and Killian's stories. The casual use of his first name brought a smile to Killian's face, one that didn't go unnoticed by Willow. I should let you rest, Killian said, standing. Both of you. Will you come back tomorrow? Thomas asked hopefully. Before Killian could answer, Willow intervened. Mr. Zane has his own affairs to attend to, Thomas. We can't expect him to spend all his time with us. I don't mind, Killian said. I'll stop by in the morning before you head to work. As he prepared to leave, Willow followed him to the door. Sheriff Drake came by, he told her quietly. Seems you've made some powerful enemies in town. Her expression grew serious. What did he say? That Miller wants you gone. Something about your father's war reputation. Willow closed her eyes briefly. I should have known that would follow us even here. Want to tell me what's really going on? She glanced back at Thomas, ensuring he couldn't overhear. Not now, but perhaps tomorrow, Killian nodded. Tomorrow, then. As he walked back to his hotel in the gathering dusk, Killian found himself more invested in the Nash siblings' situation than he'd intended. His plans for Montana seemed increasingly distant, like a destination glimpsed through morning fog. He was so deep in thought that he almost missed the three men waiting in the shadows near the hotel entrance. Almost. Years of frontier survival had honed Killian's senses to danger. He slowed his pace, hand drifting casually toward his holster. "Evening, gentlemen," he called, stopping a prudent distance away. "Something I can help you with." One of the men stepped forward, a burly figure Killian recognized as Miller's assistant from the store. "Boss wants to talk to you," the man said gruffly. "About that thieving girl. If Mr. Miller wants to speak with me, he knows where to find me," Killian replied evenly. "Preferably during daylight hours." The second man spat tobacco juice on the ground. "Ain't asking, cowboy." Killian's stance shifted subtly, weight balanced on the balls of his feet. "I think you are." The third man, who had remained silent until now, moved into the light. He was younger than the others, with the lean, dangerous look of a professional gunman. "Mr. Miller's a reasonable businessman," he said, his voice surprisingly cultured. "He simply wants to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement." "Regarding Miss Nash?" Killian asked, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "Regarding your future in Willow Creek," the man corrected. "It could be quite promising, or exceedingly brief." The threat, though delivered politely, was unmistakable. "Tell Miller I'll meet him tomorrow," Killian said after a moment's consideration. "At his store, at 10 o'clock. The well-spoken man nodded. "A wise choice. Good evening, Mr. Zane." As the three retreated into the darkness, Killian released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The situation was escalating faster than he'd anticipated. Whatever Miller wanted, it clearly involved Willow and likely the railroad plans Perkins had mentioned. Inside his hotel room, Killian sat on the edge of the bed, cleaning his revolver by lamplight as he considered his options. He had no real ties to Willow Creek or the Nash siblings. The sensible course would be to resume his journey north, leaving Willow to fight her own battles. But every time he thought of her standing proud despite her humiliation in the market, or Thomas's eager face as he listened to trail stories, something inside him rebelled against the idea of abandoning them. Sleep came fitfully that night, haunted by dreams of green eyes and copper hair, mixed with flashes of gunfire and the remembered chaos of war. Morning found Killian at Wung's laundry just as Willow arrived for her shift. Her eyes widened in surprise when she spotted him waiting by the entrance. "You're up early," she remarked, adjusting the shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill. "Need to talk to you before your shift," he said. "It's important." Concern immediately shadowed her face. "Is it Thomas? Has something happened?" "Thomas is fine," he assured her quickly. "But Miller sent men to intercept me last night, wants a meeting this morning." Willow's face paled. "What did they say?" "Nothing specific, just vague threats wrapped in business talk." Killian stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I need to know what I'm walking into, Willow. What's really happening here?" She glanced around, then took his arm. "Come with me." She led him behind the laundry to a small garden where Mrs. Chen grew vegetables and herbs. In the early morning light, with mist still clinging to the ground, it felt removed from the rest of the town. "My father wasn't just a doctor," Willow began, her voice barely above a whisper. "During the war, he operated a station on the Underground Railroad." Killian's eyebrows rose. "Helping slaves escape," she nodded. "Our farm was the last stop before they crossed into Kansas." Many continued north to Canada, but some stayed to fight for the Union. Her eyes met his, including a man named Jacob Miller. Miller, Killian repeated, the connection suddenly clear. You're Miller, his brother. Jacob escaped from a plantation in Tennessee with the help of my father. He later died at the Battle of Westport, fighting for the Union. And Miller blames your father for his brother's death. Willow nodded grimly. Says if Jacob had stayed on the plantation, he'd still be alive. Never mind that he would have lived as property, not a man. The pieces were falling into place. So when Miller saw you in his store, he recognized me immediately. I didn't know who he was until after the incident when Mrs. Chen explained. Willow's hands twisted together nervously. It's not just about the laundry property or old war grudges. It's personal for him. Killian absorbed this information, understanding now why the situation was so volatile. Does Thomas know any of this? He was too young to understand what our parents were doing during the war, and I've tried to protect him from the ugliness of it all. She looked at him intently. Killian, you shouldn't meet with Miller. He's not a reasonable man, especially where my family is concerned. All the more reason to face him directly, Killian countered. Running from men like that only makes them bolder. This isn't your fight, she insisted. Thomas and I were planning to leave as soon as he's well enough. You should continue to Montana as you planned. Killian studied her face, noting the determination in her eyes despite the fear she was clearly feeling. What if there was another option? He asked slowly. What do you mean? Come with me, he said, surprising himself with the suggestion. To Montana, both of you. Willow stared at him, clearly caught off guard. You can't be serious. I am. The territory's opening up. Good land available. Thomas would have space to grow up proper away from all this. And what would I be to you on this journey? She asked, a hint of defensiveness entering her voice. Your responsibility. Your burden, my partner, he replied simply. The word hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to fully address. Willow was the first to look away. I barely know you. Fair point, he acknowledged. But you know enough to understand I'm offering a genuine solution, not charity. She sighed, pushing back a strand of hair that had escaped her bun. I need to think about it and discuss it with Thomas. Of course, but think quickly. After I meet with Miller, things might get complicated. Please be careful, she urged. He's dangerous in ways that aren't always obvious. Killian nodded, then hesitated before adding, there's something else. Dr. Garrett mentioned other complications regarding your situation here. Said it was for you to explain, a flash of something fear. Embarrassment crossed Willow's face. That's not relevant to your meeting with Miller. Willow, he said gently, I'm walking in there blind as it is. Anything you can tell me helps. She was silent for a long moment, internal conflict evident in her expression. Finally, she spoke, her voice so low he had to lean closer to hear. Before my father died, he was corresponding with medical schools in the East, about me. She raised her chin slightly. I assisted him for years. He believed I had the aptitude to become a physician myself. Killian nodded, encouraging her to continue. Dr. Garrett was helping with the arrangements. He still is, in fact. There's a women's medical college in Philadelphia that might accept me with his recommendation. Her eyes challenged him to judge her. That's the complication. A woman with ambitions beyond being someone's wife or laundress. Instead of the disapproval she clearly expected, Killian felt a surge of admiration. Your father sounds like a man ahead of his time. Surprise flickered across her face, followed by cautious relief. Most men find the idea unsettling. I'm not most men, he said simply. And I've seen enough of the world to know talent doesn't belong to just one sex. A genuine smile transformed her face, making her look younger and reminding Killian that despite her responsibilities and mature demeanor, Willow was only 22. "I should get to work," she said, glancing toward the laundry. "Mrs. Chen will be wondering where I am." "And I have a meeting to prepare for," Killian agreed. "I'll stop by to see you and Thomas afterward." As they parted ways, Killian felt even more certain that his impulsive offer had been the right decision. Willow Nash deserved better than hiding from old hatreds in a town that would never truly accept her. And Thomas needed a chance to grow up without the shadow of his father's wartime actions hanging over him. What surprised Killian most, however, was how naturally he had included himself in their future. The lone trail he'd been following for years suddenly seemed less appealing than the prospect of building something with the Nash siblings at his side. With these thoughts occupying his mind, Killian made his way to Miller's general store precisely at 10 o'clock. The shop was unusually empty of customers, with only Miller himself and the young gunman from the previous night present. "Mr. Zane," Miller greeted, his tone falsely cordial. "Appreciate you coming by," Killian nodded, remaining near the door. "You wanted to talk." Miller gestured toward a door at the back of the store. "My office would be more comfortable." "Here's fine," Killian replied, not willing to give up his clear exit route. A flicker of annoyance crossed Miller's face before he composed himself. "As you wish." He leaned against the counter, attempting a casual posture that didn't quite succeed. "I understand you've taken an interest in the Nash woman and her brother." "I have." "Admirable, helping those in need." Miller's smile didn't reach his cold eyes. "But I wonder if you know what kind of people you're associating with." "I know exactly what kind of people they are," Killian stated, holding Miller's gaze. "And what kind you are." The shopkeeper's smile vanished. "I see she's filled your head with her version of events." Actually, she was quite reluctant to discuss your personal vendetta. Miller's face hardened. "That family has blood on their hands. Her father's actions saved lives," Killian interrupted. "Including your brother's, from what I hear. Gave him a chance to die as a free man instead of a slave. He'd be alive if they hadn't interfered." Miller's composure cracked, revealing the raw hatred beneath. "They turned him against his own people, sent him to die for a cause that wasn't his fight." Killian regarded him steadily. "Sounds to me like he found something worth fighting for, something you wouldn't understand." The young gunman shifted position slightly, his hand hovering near his holster. Miller noticed the movement and held up a restraining hand. "We're just talking, Mr. Zane." He took a deep breath, regaining his composure. "Let me be direct. The Nash woman has become a problem. She supports the Chinese laundress who refuses to sell her property for the railroad development. And you stand to profit handsomely from that development," Killian surmised. Miller didn't deny it. "Progress benefits everyone eventually. The town needs that railroad connection." "So what exactly do you want from me?" "Your influence," Miller replied smoothly. "Convince the Nash woman to stop working for Mrs. Chen. Better yet, persuade her to leave Willow Creek entirely." Killian pretended to consider this. "And if I do, there could be opportunities for you here. The railroad will need reliable men, men who understand how business works." Miller's eyes gleamed with avarice. "Or if Montana still calls to you, I could ensure you leave with considerably more resources than you arrived with." "You're offering to pay me to betray her trust." Miller shrugged. "I'm offering a business arrangement between gentlemen. $500 to ensure the Nash woman and her brother are gone within the week." The sum was substantial enough to purchase prime land in Montana and stock it with cattle. A year ago, Killian might have been tempted, if only for a moment. But now the thought of betraying Willow's trust was unthinkable. "Not interested," he said flatly. Miller's expression hardened. "Don't be hasty. Consider what's at stake." "I have." Killian straightened, his hand resting casually near his holster. My answer stands. Then perhaps you should join the Nash woman in her departure, Miller suggested, his tone shifting from persuasive to threatening. Willow Creek isn't kind to those who stand in the way of progress. I've stood against worse than greedy shopkeepers and bought politicians, Killian replied evenly. But I appreciate knowing where we stand. As he turned to leave, Miller called after him. She'll never make it as a doctor, you know. Women don't have the constitution for it. Dr. Garrett's filling her head with impossible dreams. Killian paused, hand on the door. Seems to me the impossible is just what hasn't been done yet. Outside, he took a deep breath of fresh air, cleansing his lungs of the shop's stale atmosphere. The meeting had gone as expected. Miller revealed his true intentions, and the lines were now clearly drawn. What Killian hadn't anticipated was the depth of his own commitment to Willow's cause. Somewhere in the past 2 days, her fight had become his fight, her future intertwined with his own in ways he was still coming to understand. He headed toward the laundry, intending to tell Willow about the meeting, but stopped short when he spotted Sheriff Drake watching him from across the street. The lawman nodded once before disappearing into the saloon. Recognizing that their conversation would be best held in private, Killian decided to wait until Willow's midday break. Instead, he made his way to the telegraph office. Need to send a message to Cheyenne, he told the operator. To Marshal James Harker. The operator, a thin man with spectacles, prepared his equipment. Go ahead. Killian dictated a brief message requesting information on Miller and the mayor, particularly regarding their railroad dealings. Harker was an old Army companion who now worked for the federal marshals. If anyone could provide insight into the legal aspects of the situation, it would be him. After sending the telegraph, Killian visited the land office, where a board clerk was happy to discuss the proposed railroad route through Willow Creek in exchange for a cigar. Right through the Chinese district, the clerk confirmed, pointing to a map. Mayor's been buying up properties all around it for months. Only holdout is that laundry. Seems like a lot of trouble for one small building, Killian observed. The clerk snorted. It ain't about the building. It's the location. Without that specific parcel, the whole station plan falls apart. They'd have to move it half a mile south, which means all the land they've already bought would be worth a fraction of what they paid. This information deepened Killian's understanding of what was at stake. Miller and the mayor stood to lose a fortune if Mrs. Chen continued to resist selling. No wonder they were desperate to remove Willow, who had become the Chinese woman's most reliable ally. By the time noon approached, Killian had formulated a clearer picture of the town's political landscape and the forces aligned against Willow. When she emerged from the laundry for her break, he was waiting across the street. How did it go? She asked anxiously as soon as they were alone in her quarters. Thomas was awake but resting, his color much improved from the previous day. About as expected, Killian replied, keeping his voice low. Offered me $500 to convince you to leave town. Willow's eyes widened. That's a substantial amount, would have been once upon a time. She studied his face. But not now. Some things can't be bought, he said simply. Besides, I've been learning more about their railroad scheme. They're desperate to get Mrs. Chen's property. Willow nodded. She's told me some of it. They've tried everything: threats, bribes, even sending men to damage the laundry equipment. Has she considered selling? For a fair price. It's not about money for her. The laundry was built by her late husband. It's all she has left of him. Willow's expression softened. She won't sell at any price. Killian respected such loyalty, even as he recognized the danger it created. Miller made it clear they won't stop pressuring you both. We've withstood pressure before, Willow said, her voice steady despite the worry in her eyes. When will you leave for Montana? The question caught him off guard. "I meant what I said earlier about you and Thomas coming with me." She met his gaze directly. "Why would you do that? Take responsibility for two strangers. You're hardly strangers anymore," he pointed out. "And I've learned to trust my instincts about people. They're telling me you and Thomas belong in my future." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "That's rather forward, Mr. Zane." "Killian," he corrected automatically, a small smile playing at his lips. "And yes, I suppose it is. But time moves differently out here. People learn to recognize what matters quickly." Before she could respond, Thomas called from his pallet. "I want to go to Montana. Can we, Willow? Please?" She turned to her brother, momentarily flustered. "You've been eavesdropping, young man." "Not my fault you're talking right here," Thomas replied reasonably. "And I think Killian's right. We should go with him." "It's not that simple," Willow began. "Why not?" Thomas persisted. "You said yourself there's nothing for us here, and Killian knows about ranching. He could teach me." "Your sister has her own dreams," Killian interjected gently, "about becoming a doctor." Thomas nodded eagerly. "I know, she's smart as anything. Pa always said she had the steadiest hands he'd ever seen." Willow's expression softened at the mention of their father. "That's kind of you to remember, Thomas. So we go to Montana first," the boy continued logically, "get settled somewhere safe. Then when I'm older and can look after myself, you can go to that medical school in Philadelphia." The simplicity of the boy's solution hung in the air. Killian watched as Willow considered it, her practical nature warring with what he suspected was a deep-seated fear of depending on anyone but herself. "It could work," Killian said quietly. "Montana needs doctors as much as anywhere, maybe more. And what about you?" she asked, her voice equally soft. "What would you expect in return for such generosity?" Thomas looked between them, sensing the undercurrents of the adult conversation but not fully understanding them. "A partnership," Killian replied, choosing his words carefully. "Nothing more or less than what you're willing to give." He held her gaze steadily. "I'm not offering charity, Willow. I'm offering a chance for all three of us to build something worthwhile." The vulnerability in her eyes nearly undid him. For a moment, the strong, determined woman who had faced public humiliation with her head high was replaced by a young woman carrying burdens far too heavy for her shoulders alone. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This isn't a decision to make hastily." "Of course," Killian agreed. "But Miller won't wait forever to make his next move." As if summoned by his words, a commotion erupted outside. Shouts and the sound of breaking glass carried from the direction of the laundry. "Stay here," Killian ordered, hand moving to his holster as he headed for the door. "Willow." Thomas called anxiously. "It's all right," she assured her brother, though her own face had paled. "Stay in bed. I'll be right back." She followed Killian outside, where they were met with the sight of black smoke rising from Wang's laundry. People were running toward the building, some carrying buckets of water. "Mrs. Chen," Willow gasped, starting forward. Killian caught her arm. "Wait, this could be a trap. She could be inside." Willow pulled away from his grasp. "I have to help." Before he could stop her, she was running toward the laundry. Cursing under his breath, Killian followed, scanning the gathering crowd for signs of Miller or his men. The scene at the laundry was chaotic. The fire appeared to have started in the back room where the stoves were located, but it was spreading quickly through the wooden structure. Several of the laundry workers were outside, coughing and supporting each other. "Mrs. Chen," Willow called, approaching one of the women. "Is she safe?" The woman shook her head, pointing frantically toward the burning building. "Still inside, with her grandson." Without hesitation, Willow darted toward the entrance. Killian lunged after her, catching her just before she could plunge into the smoke-filled doorway. "Let me go," she cried, struggling against his grip. "They're still in there. I'll go," he said firmly, turning her to face him. "You stay here. Thomas needs you." Their eyes locked for a brief, intense moment before she nodded, stepping back. Killian pulled his bandana up over his nose and mouth before entering the burning building. The smoke was thick, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Heat pressed against him like a physical force as flames licked up the walls. "Mrs. Chen," he called, crouching low where the air was slightly clearer. "Where are you?" A faint coughing sound led him deeper into the laundry, past overturned tubs and scattered linens that were quickly becoming fuel for the spreading fire. In the back room, he found Mrs. Chen huddled in a corner, clutching a small boy of about 4 or 5. "Help is here," Killian said, kneeling beside them. "Can you walk?" Mrs. Chen shook her head weakly, gesturing to her leg, which was trapped beneath a fallen beam. The boy was conscious but terrified, his small face streaked with soot. "Grandson first," the elderly woman insisted, pushing the child toward Killian. Without argument, Killian scooped up the boy. "I'll be right back for you," he promised Mrs. Chen. "Hold on." The return to the entrance was more difficult, as the fire had spread to block their original path. Killian was forced to detour through a side room, shielding the child with his body as burning debris fell around them. When they finally emerged into the daylight, a cheer went up from the gathered crowd. Willow rushed forward to take the boy, her face pale with worry. "Mrs. Chen is still inside," Killian gasped, already turning back toward the burning building. "Her leg is trapped. Killian, it's too dangerous." Willow called after him, but he was already disappearing back into the smoke. The interior of the laundry was now a hellscape of flame and choking smoke. Killian dropped to his hands and knees, crawling toward where he'd left Mrs. Chen. The heat was blistering, causing his eyes to water and his lungs to burn despite the bandana. He found her unconscious but still breathing. The beam pinning her leg was fully ablaze now, making it impossible to touch with bare hands. Glancing around desperately, Killian spotted a metal washboard nearby. Using it as a lever, he managed to lift the burning beam just enough to pull Mrs. Chen free. Hoisting her slight form over his shoulder, he began the treacherous journey back toward the entrance. The smoke was so thick now that he had to navigate by memory and instinct, feeling his way along walls that were rapidly being consumed by flames. A section of the ceiling collapsed just behind them as they neared the front of the building, sending a shower of sparks and burning debris that caught the back of Killian's coat. The searing pain told him he was on fire, but there was no time to stop. With a final surge of strength, he staggered through the doorway into the blessed coolness of the outside air. Hands reached for Mrs. Chen, taking her from his shoulders. Someone else was beating at his burning coat. Through smoke-stung eyes, he saw Willow's face close to his, her expression a mixture of relief and fear. "You're hurt," she said, helping him move away from the building. "I'm all right," he managed, though his voice was raw from smoke and his back felt as though it had been branded. They reached a grassy area where Mrs. Chen had been laid, with her grandson clinging to her hand. Dr. Garrett was already there, administering to the elderly woman. "How is she?" Killian asked between coughs. "Burns on her legs, smoke in her lungs, but she'll live," the doctor replied without looking up. "Thanks to you." Willow was examining Killian's back, her touch gentle but professional. "Your coat protected you from the worst of it, but you've got some burns that need attention." "Later," he said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "This was no accident." Willow followed his gaze. "You think Miller—" "I know it," Killian growled. "This is exactly the kind of warning he would send." Sure enough, at the edge of the gathering, Killian spotted the young gunman who had been in Miller's store earlier. Their eyes met briefly before the man melted away into the crowd. The laundry was beyond saving now, the frame of the building collapsing in on itself as the volunteer bucket brigade focused on preventing the fire from spreading to neighboring structures. Everything she had was in there, Willow said softly, watching as Mrs. Chen wept silently while clutching her grandson. Her livelihood, her home, her husband's memory. Killian's jaw tightened. Miller's crossed a line. Using fire in a town built mostly of wood, he could have killed dozens of people. What can we do? Before Killian could answer, Sheriff Drake approached, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the destruction. "Terrible accident," he commented, though his tone suggested he knew otherwise. "No accident," Killian replied bluntly. "Miller's sending a message." Drake's eyes narrowed. "That's a serious accusation, Zane. Got any proof?" His hired gun was watching the show from over there. Killian nodded toward where he'd seen the man. Seemed mighty pleased with himself. "Hearsay and suspicion," Drake dismissed. "Not enough to make an arrest in my town." "Your town?" Killian challenged. "Or Miller's?" The sheriff's hand drifted toward his holster. "Careful, Cowboy, don't push your luck." Willow stepped between them. "Please, this isn't helping. Mrs. Chen needs shelter and medical attention." Drake relaxed slightly. "The church will take them in, I expect." "Reverend Simmons is a charitable sort." "And then what?" Killian demanded. "Miller burns down the church next." "I suggest you mind your own business, Zane," Drake said coldly, "before you find yourself in more trouble than you can handle." As the sheriff walked away, Willow turned to Killian. "We need to get back to Thomas. He'll be worried sick." "You go," Killian said. "I want to speak with Mrs. Chen first." Willow hesitated, clearly torn between her brother and her employer. "I'll check on Thomas, then come back to help with Mrs. Chen and her grandson." After she left, Killian approached the elderly Chinese woman who was now sitting up with her grandson in her lap. Dr. Garrett had bandaged her leg and was giving her something to drink from a small flask. "Mrs. Chen," Killian said, crouching beside her despite the pain in his back. "I'm sorry about your laundry." She regarded him with dark, intelligent eyes. "You saved Lion," she said, stroking her grandson's head. "I owe you great debt." "No debt," he assured her. "But I need to ask, will you rebuild?" A complex mixture of emotions crossed her weathered face. "Cannot." "No money, no help." She looked at the smoldering ruins of her business. "Miller win now." "What if you had help?" Killian asked. "What if we fought back?" Mrs. Chen studied him carefully. "Why you help, not your fight?" "It became my fight when they tried to use Willow to get to you," he replied honestly. "And when they set fire to a building with a child inside." She nodded slowly, seeming to reach a decision. "I have paper, in bank box, for land." She gestured to Dr. Garrett. "He witness when my husband buy." "Legal paper." The doctor nodded confirmation. "The deed is proper and registered. Miller's been trying to challenge it for months, claiming Wang Chen wasn't a citizen and couldn't legally own property." "But he was," Mrs. Chen insisted. "Show paper at Gold Mountain." "Become citizen before railroad finish." This was a crucial piece of information. If Wang Chen had indeed become a naturalized citizen before purchasing the property, Miller's attempts to invalidate the deed would fail under legal scrutiny. "Where is this paper now?" Killian asked. "Bank vault," Dr. Garrett answered. "I suggested she keep it there after the first threat started." "Good." Killian stood, wincing as the movement pulled at his burned skin. "We need to get it to the right authorities, not Drake and certainly not the mayor." "The circuit judge arrives next week," Garrett offered. "He's a fair man from what I've heard." Killian shook his head. "Miller won't wait that long, not now that he's shown his hand." As if to confirm his words, a commotion arose from the direction of the Nash quarters. Killian heard Willow's voice raised in protest, followed by Thomas's frightened shout. Without hesitation, Killian sprinted toward the sound. ignoring the searing pain across his back. He rounded the corner to find two men Miller's assistants from the store forcing Willow and Thomas from their room, while a small crowd of townspeople watched with mixed expressions of concern and curiosity. "What the hell is going on?" Killian demanded, hand moving to his holster. "Sheriff's orders," one of the men declared, showing a paper. "These two are being evicted for non-payment of rent." "That's a lie," Willow protested, standing protectively in front of Thomas. "We've paid Mrs. Chen every week." "Mrs. Chen ain't the owner no more," the second man sneered. "Property's been seized for back taxes. Mayor's orders." Killian stepped forward, deliberately placing himself between the men and the Nash siblings. "Show me that paper." The first man hesitated, then reluctantly handed over the document. Killian scanned it quickly, noting the official-looking seal but also the absence of a judge's signature. "This isn't legal," he stated, tearing the paper in half. "You need a court order for eviction, signed by a judge. This is just the mayor playing make-believe." The men exchanged uncertain glances. Sheriff said, "I don't care what Sheriff Drake said," Killian interrupted. "You touch either of them and you'll answer to me." His hand rested casually on his holster, but there was nothing casual about the steel in his voice or the dangerous glint in his eyes. After a tense moment, the larger of the two men spat on the ground. "This ain't over. Boss won't like it." "Tell Miller he can discuss it with me personally," Killian replied, "if he's got the spine for it." As the men retreated, muttering threats, Killian turned to Willow and Thomas. "Are you both all right?" Thomas nodded, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and admiration. Willow, however, looked shaken. "They said they'd take Thomas to the orphanage in Denver if we didn't leave immediately," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Said I was an unfit guardian." Killian's jaw tightened. "They won't touch either of you, I promise." "This is escalating too quickly," she worried. "First the laundry, now this. What will they try next?" It was a valid concern. Miller had shown he was willing to use increasingly dangerous tactics to achieve his goals. "We need to leave," Killian decided. "Tonight. Before they can make another move." "Leave," Thomas repeated. "For Montana. Eventually. But first we need to get Mrs. Chen's deed to someone who can use it against Miller and the mayor." Killian looked at Willow intently. "I know this is happening fast, but I don't see another way to keep you both safe." She met his gaze, and he could see her weighing their options with the practical mind that had kept her and Thomas alive through so much adversity. "Where would we go?" she asked finally. "Cheyenne first. I have a friend there in the marshal's office who can help with the legal matters. Then north when it's safe." He took her hand gently. "I meant what I said before, Willow, about Montana, about all of us." Thomas moved closer, looking up at his sister with pleading eyes. "Please, Willow." "I don't want to go to an orphanage." The fear in the boy's voice seemed to resolve something in Willow. She squeezed Killian's hand before releasing it. "All right," she said decisively. "We'll go, but we need to help Mrs. Chen and Lion too. I won't leave them to Miller's mercy." Killian nodded. "They'll come with us, at least as far as Cheyenne." As Willow and Thomas quickly gathered their meager belongings, Killian kept watch outside. The confrontation had dispersed most of the onlookers, but he knew it was only a matter of time before Miller learned of his men's failure and escalated further. Within an hour, they had collected Mrs. Chen and Lion from the church, explained the situation to Dr. Garrett, and retrieved the precious deed from the bank. The doctor promised to send a detailed account of Miller's actions to the circuit judge and the territorial governor. "What about you?" Killian asked him. "Miller won't be happy about your involvement." Garrett smiled grimly. "I've been meaning to visit my colleague in Denver for some time. Think I'll leave on tomorrow's stage, after I've written those letters." As dusk fell, Killian led their small group to the livery stable where Copper was boarded. The stable hand, a teenager named Eddie, seemed nervous but cooperative. "Sheriff was asking about your horse earlier," he informed Killian. "Said you might be leaving town in a hurry." "Did he now?" Killian flipped the boy a coin. "And what did you tell him?" "That you paid board through the end of the week," Eddie replied with a sly grin. "And that Copper throws a fit if anyone but you tries to saddle him." "Smart lad." Killian patted his shoulder. "Now we need transportation for 5. What have you got?" Eddie scratched his head. "Got a small wagon." "Not much to look at, but the wheels are sound and the team is steady." "That'll do, and we'll need Copper saddled too." While Eddie prepared the wagon, Killian discussed the plan with Willow. "We'll head south first, then circle back east toward Cheyenne, throw off anyone who might follow." She nodded, adjusting the blanket around Thomas, who was sitting on a hay bale with Lion, teaching the young boy a clapping game. "How far to Cheyenne?" 3 days, maybe 4 with the wagon." Killian glanced at Mrs. Chen, who was resting on another bale, her injured leg carefully extended. "We'll have to take it slow." "And after Cheyenne?" Willow asked softly. Killian met her gaze. "That depends on what you want, Willow. I meant what I said about Montana, about building something together, but I understand if you have other plans." She was silent for a moment, watching Thomas with the small Chinese boy. "He deserves a chance at a normal life. So does Lion." Her eyes returned to Killian's face. "And perhaps, so do we." The simple statement, with all its implications, settled between them like a promise. Before Killian could respond, Eddie returned, leading a team of horses attached to a canvas-covered wagon. "Best I could do on short notice," the boy apologized. "Put some fresh hay in the back for bedding." "It's perfect," Killian assured him, pressing another coin into his palm. "If anyone asks, ain't seen you since this morning," Eddie confirmed with a wink. "And I've got terrible memory for directions." With Eddie's help, they loaded their belongings into the wagon and made Mrs. Chen as comfortable as possible in the back with the children. Willow would drive while Killian rode alongside on Copper, keeping watch for pursuit. As they prepared to leave, Eddie suddenly stiffened, peering through the stable doors. "Riders coming," he warned. "Looks like Miller and some of his men and the sheriff." Killian cursed under his breath. "How many?" 5, maybe 6. "We need more time," Willow said anxiously. Looking at Mrs. Chen and the children, Killian made a quick decision. "Take the back trail behind the livery. It joins the main road about a mile south. I'll delay them here." "Killian, no," Willow protested. "There are too many." "I'm not planning to fight them," he assured her. "Just create a distraction." He turned to Eddie. "There's a bottle of whiskey in my saddlebag. Fetch it, quick." While the boy complied, Killian moved to the wagon and helped Willow onto the driver's seat. "Head south, then east when you reach the creek crossing. I'll catch up within the hour." Her hand caught his, squeezing tightly. "Be careful." For a brief moment, their eyes held, communicating feelings neither was yet ready to voice aloud. Then Eddie returned with the whiskey, breaking the spell. "Go," Killian urged, stepping back from the wagon. "I'll be right behind you." With obvious reluctance, Willow flicked the reins, setting the team in motion. The wagon rumbled out the back exit of the livery, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Killian uncorked the whiskey bottle and splashed a generous amount on his clothes before taking a long swallow. The burning liquid steadied his nerves as he considered his options. He needed to create a believable scenario that would delay pursuit without escalating to gunplay if possible. When the approaching riders were nearly at the livery, Killian stumbled out the front entrance, whiskey bottle in hand, singing a bawdy trail song at the top of his lungs. "Well, look who it is," Sheriff Drake called, reining his horse to a stop. "Enjoying our local hospitality, Zane?" Killian swayed dramatically, adopting the persona of a man deep in his cups. "Sheriff, just the man I wanted to see." He took another swig from the bottle. "Was just celebrating my good fortune." Miller pushed his horse forward, his face tight with suspicion. "Where are the Nash woman and her brother?" Killian blinked owlishly. "Who?" "Oh, that pretty redhead from the market. Haven't seen her since this morning." He belched for effect. "Been right here, getting acquainted with this fine establishment's liquor supply." Drake dismounted, approaching cautiously. "Eddie says you paid for your horse through the week." "Changed my mind," Killian slurred. "Montana'll still be there next month. Figured I'd enjoy the local scenery a bit longer." He winked clumsily. "Especially that new girl at the saloon. Quite the dancer. That one." One of Miller's men laughed, earning a sharp glare from his employer. "He's lying," Miller declared. "Check the stable for his horse." Two men dismounted and entered the livery while Drake continued to study Killian with skeptical eyes. "You know, for a man who was so concerned about the Nash woman earlier, you seem mighty unconcerned now," the sheriff observed. Killian shrugged expansively. "Good deed for the day. Done my part." He leaned in conspiratorially, breath heavy with whiskey fumes. "Between us, Sheriff," she was getting a bit clingy. "Asking about intentions and such." Drake snorted. "And that sent you running for the bottle. Wouldn't be the first time a woman drove a man to drink," Killian replied with a wink. The men returned from the stable. "His horse is still there," one reported. "Saddled and ready, though." "Planning a midnight ride?" Miller asked, his tone dangerous despite the casual words. Killian raised the bottle in a mock toast. "A gentleman never tells." For a tense moment, he thought Miller might order his men to search further, perhaps discovering the missing wagon. But the merchant seemed to accept the drunken cowboy act, if reluctantly. "Keep an eye on him, Drake," Miller instructed, "and post men on the roads out of town. I want those Nash siblings found." "On what grounds?" Killian asked, dropping the drunken act momentarily. "They've broken no laws." Miller's eyes narrowed at the sudden shift in Killian's demeanor. "Material witnesses in the laundry fire investigation," he improvised. "And the boy is a minor without proper guardianship." "His sister seems proper enough to me," Killian countered. "An unmarried woman of questionable character is hardly suitable," Miller sneered. "The territorial orphanage will provide a much more appropriate environment." Killian's hand drifted toward his holster, his control slipping. "You say one more word against Miss Nash, and we'll see how well you speak with no teeth." The atmosphere tensed immediately, Miller's men reaching for their weapons while Drake stepped between the two men. "That's enough," the sheriff ordered. "Zane, you're drunk and disorderly. Spend the night in my jail to sober up." It wasn't part of Killian's plan to be arrested, but he recognized it might actually work to his advantage. If they believed he was safely locked up, they'd be less likely to connect him with the missing wagon. "Fine," he grumbled, allowing Drake to take his arm. "But I want my property respected, and my horse stays at the livery." As Drake led him toward the jailhouse, Killian glanced back to see Miller and his men heading in different directions, presumably to set up their search for Willow and the others. He hoped the head start he'd given them would be enough. The jail was a small, sturdy building with 3 cells, all currently empty. Drake locked Killian in the one furthest from the door, taking his gunbelt and the remains of the whiskey bottle. "You're playing a dangerous game, Zane," the sheriff commented, settling behind his desk. "Miller isn't a man who forgets slights." "Noted," Killian replied dryly, sitting on the thin mattress that served as a bed. "How long do you plan to keep me here?" "Until morning at least." Drake regarded him thoughtfully. "Unless you want to tell me where the Nash woman and her brother really are." Killian stretched out on the mattress, folding his arms behind his head. Already told you, haven't seen them since this morning. Right, and I'm the King of England, Drake sighed. Get some sleep, Zane. You'll need a clear head tomorrow. As the sheriff busied himself with paperwork, Killian closed his eyes, appearing to drift off while actually planning his next move. He needed to escape and catch up with Willow and the others before Miller's men found their trail. The opportunity came shortly after midnight, when a commotion outside drew Drake's attention. The sheriff checked his sidearm before heading out to investigate, leaving Killian alone in the jailhouse. The moment Drake was gone, Killian sprang into action. From his boot, he retrieved a small lockpick he'd carried since his days riding with Mosby's Rangers during the war. The cell lock was simple and yielded quickly to his practiced touch. Moving silently, he retrieved his gun belt from Drake's desk drawer, then slipped out the back window of the jailhouse. The night was clear and cool, the three-quarter moon providing enough light to navigate by. Killian made his way cautiously to the livery stable, where Eddie was dozing in the hayloft. "Thought you might be back," the boy whispered, climbing down when Killian called softly. "They've got men watching the main roads." "I figured," Killian replied, saddling Copper quickly. "Any sign they found the others?" Eddie shook his head. "Not that I heard, but Miller's offering $50 to anyone who brings information about the Nash woman or the Chinaman's wife." That was concerning. In a frontier town, $50 could turn even decent folks into informants. "I need one more favor," Killian said, securing his bedroll behind the saddle. "If anyone asks, I stole my horse back and headed north toward Montana." "Can you remember that?" Eddie grinned. "North to Montana. Got it." Killian flipped him a gold eagle. "That's for your trouble. And for looking after Willow and the others if they come back before I do." "Yes, sir." The boy's eyes widened at the generous payment. "You can count on me." With a final nod of thanks, Killian mounted Copper and rode out through the back of the stable, keeping to the shadows until he reached the edge of town. Once clear of the buildings, he headed south at a gallop, following the trail Willow and the wagon would have taken. The night was quiet except for the steady rhythm of Copper's hooves and the occasional call of a night bird. Killian pushed the horse harder than he would have preferred, knowing that every minute increased the distance between Miller's men and those he had sworn to protect. After an hour of hard riding, he reached the creek crossing where he'd instructed Willow to turn east. The ground was soft enough here to show tracks, and he could clearly make out the wheel marks of the wagon turning as directed. Relief flooded through him as he followed the trail. So far, it appeared no one else had passed this way recently. With luck, they had a solid lead on any pursuit. He caught up with the wagon shortly before dawn, approaching cautiously until he could make out Willow's copper hair gleaming in the first light of day. She had stopped to rest the horses near a small stream, setting up a modest camp sheltered by cottonwood trees. Thomas spotted him first, jumping up from where he'd been tending a small fire. "Killian, you made it." Willow turned quickly, her face lighting up with relief that sent an unexpected warmth through Killian's chest. "Any trouble?" he asked, dismounting and leading Copper to the stream. "None," she reported. "We haven't seen another soul since leaving town." Mrs. Chen was seated on a blanket, her grandson asleep beside her. She nodded respectfully to Killian. "You come fast. Good. How's your leg?" he asked, noting the fresh bandage Willow had applied. "Better. Girl, no medicine." Mrs. Chen patted Willow's hand with affection. "Like doctor already." Willow blushed slightly at the praise. "I just changed the dressing and gave her some willow bark tea for the pain." While Copper drank from the stream, Killian updated them on the situation in town, including Miller's reward for information and his own escape from jail. "So they'll be looking for us," Willow concluded, her expression worried. "Yes, but they're expecting us to head north toward Montana." Killian accepted the cup of coffee she offered. "We should be safe on this route to Cheyenne as long as we're careful." Thomas, who had been listening intently, asked, "Are we still going to Montana eventually?" Killian glanced at Willow before answering. "That's the plan if your sister agrees." "And Mrs. Chen and Lion?" the boy persisted. "Will they come too?" Mrs. Chen shook her head. "Have family in San Francisco. Go there after paper helps stop bad men." They rested for another hour, allowing the horses to recover while they ate a simple breakfast. As they prepared to continue their journey, Killian found himself watching Willow as she efficiently packed their supplies and checked on Mrs. Chen's comfort in the wagon. There was a quiet competence to her movements that he admired, a resilience that had been forged through hardship but hadn't hardened into bitterness. Despite everything she'd endured, she maintained a genuine kindness that showed in her care for her brother, for Mrs. Chen and Lion, and even for him. When she caught him watching, a faint blush colored her cheeks. "Is something wrong?" "Not at all," he replied honestly. "Just thinking how lucky Thomas is to have you for a sister." Her expression softened. "I'm the lucky one. He's all the family I have left." "Not anymore," Killian said quietly. "If you'll have us, Mrs. Chen and Lion are your family now too, and so am I." The words hung between them, more meaningful than any formal declaration could have been. For a moment, Willow seemed at a loss for response, her green eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and something warmer. Before she could reply, Thomas called from the wagon, breaking the moment. "Willow, Lion says he's hungry again." She smiled apologetically at Killian. "Duty calls." As she moved away, Killian found himself wondering at the ease with which he had committed himself to this makeshift family. For years, he had wandered alone, avoiding attachments and responsibilities beyond the immediate demands of survival. Yet in the span of a few days, everything had changed. And strangely, he felt no regret, only a growing certainty that whatever the future held, his place was with Willow and Thomas. They traveled steadily eastward for the next 2 days, keeping to less traveled routes and camping away from established trails. The weather remained favorable, with clear skies and mild temperatures that made the journey as comfortable as possible for Mrs. Chen and the children. Killian and Willow fell into an easy rhythm of shared responsibilities. She managed the camp and cared for Mrs. Chen's injury, while he handled the horses and kept watch for potential pursuit. Thomas appointed himself guardian of Lion, teaching the younger boy English words and simple games to pass the time. On the evening of the 3rd day, as they made camp in a sheltered valley about half a day's ride from Cheyenne, Killian noticed Willow sitting apart from the others, watching the sunset with a pensive expression. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling beside her on a fallen log. She smiled faintly. "I'm not sure they're worth that much. Try me." Willow sighed, tucking a strand of copper hair behind her ear. "I was thinking about my father, about what he sacrificed to help others during the war." She glanced toward Mrs. Chen and the boys. "And whether I'm doing the right thing now, running instead of fighting." "Sometimes retreating is the smartest strategy," Killian observed. "Your father couldn't have helped anyone if he'd been killed or imprisoned early in the war." "That's true." She considered this. "He always said courage isn't about never being afraid, it's about doing what's right despite your fear." Wise man. "He would have liked you," she said softly, "despite your Confederate past." Killian smiled wryly. "I wasn't much of a Confederate, truth be told. Joined up because it seemed the thing to do when you're 17 and everyone you know is going to war." He gazed at the deepening colors of the sunset. "Learned pretty quick that most of the fighting had nothing to do with the grand causes they talked about in the speeches." "What made you leave Virginia after the war?" she asked. "Family still there. Lost my parents to typhoid before the war started." "No siblings," he shrugged. "The farm was gone, taken for taxes like yours." Figured there wasn't much point staying where there were more bitter memories than opportunities. Willow nodded in understanding. "So you headed west." Seemed like the only direction that made sense. New beginning and all that. He glanced at her. "What about you? If things had been different, would you have gone straight to Philadelphia for medical school?" She considered this. "Eventually. But Thomas was too young to leave behind, and after our parents died, he needed stability more than I needed education." Her expression grew determined. "But I haven't given up on that dream, just postponed it, as you should," Killian agreed. "The world needs more doctors who care about people the way you do." His sincere belief in her abilities touched Willow deeply. Throughout her life, her father had been the only man who had truly supported her medical aspirations. Even Dr. Garrett, while helpful, had occasionally exhibited skepticism about whether a woman could withstand the rigors of formal medical training. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing I can do it. I've seen enough of the world to know that ability has nothing to do with whether you wear trousers or skirts," Killian replied. "And I've seen enough of you to know you've got more skill and compassion than most doctors I've encountered." Their conversation was interrupted by Thomas calling them for the evening meal. As they joined the others around the small fire, Killian noticed how naturally they had formed a circle, not 5 strangers thrown together by circumstance, but a group bound by mutual care and shared purpose. After they ate, Mrs. Chen produced a small wooden flute from her bundle of salvaged possessions. The sweet, haunting melody she played seemed to transcend language, speaking directly to the heart. Even Lion, usually energetic and restless, sat quietly, leaning against Thomas as he listened to his grandmother's music. Later, when the children were asleep and Mrs. Chen had retired to the wagon, Killian took the first watch while Willow settled near the fire with a blanket. "You should rest," he told her. "I'll wake you for the second watch. I'm not sure I can sleep," she admitted. "Too much on my mind." Killian nodded in understanding. "Tomorrow we reach Cheyenne. Things will be clearer once we speak with Marshal Harker." "What do you think will happen?" she asked. "With Miller and the mayor, I mean. If the deed is as solid as Mrs. Chen believes, and if we can prove Miller's involvement in the fire, they'll face serious charges." Killian stoked the fire absently. "Land fraud is one thing, but arson that endangers lives is a federal matter." "And if we can't prove it," he met her gaze steadily, "then we continue to Montana as planned, build something new far from their reach." Willow pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "It sounds so simple when you say it like that." "Not simple," he corrected, "but possible. Sometimes that's enough to start with." She studied his face in the firelight, noting the quiet confidence in his expression. "You really believe we can do this, don't you? Build a new life in Montana." "I do." His voice was low but certain. "I've been roaming long enough to know when I've found something worth stopping for." The weight of his words settled between them, clear in meaning despite their restraint. "Killian," she began hesitantly, "I should tell you, I'm not looking for a husband, if that's what you're thinking." He smiled slightly. "I wasn't proposing, Willow, at least not yet." The "not yet" hung in the air, neither a promise nor a threat, but a simple acknowledgement of possibilities. "My plans have always included medical school," she continued, feeling it important to be clear. "I won't give that up." "I wouldn't ask you to." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Whatever this is between us, it isn't about me expecting you to be some conventional wife, content with cooking and children." Relief softened her features. "Most men would." "I'm not most men," he reminded her. "And you're certainly not most women." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant call of a night bird. "Get some rest," Killian finally said. "Tomorrow will be a long day." This time Willow didn't protest. She settled into her blankets, and within minutes, her steady breathing indicated she had fallen asleep. Killian watched over the camp, his thoughts turning to the future that was taking shape in his mind: a ranch in Montana, with enough land for cattle and horses, a home large enough for a family, and perhaps, someday, a small medical practice for a doctor with copper hair and determined green eyes. It was a dream more detailed and hopeful than any he'd allowed himself in years. And for the first time since the war had ended, leaving him adrift in a country struggling to redefine itself, Killian Zane felt he might have found a purpose worthy of the second chance he'd been given. They reached Cheyenne by midday the following day, the growing frontier town bustling with activity. Railroad construction had transformed what had been a small military post into an important transportation hub, with new buildings rising on almost every street. Killian led them directly to the federal marshal's office, a solid brick building near the center of town. Inside, they found Marshal James Harker reviewing wanted posters at his desk. The marshal looked up as they entered, his weathered face breaking into a surprised smile when he recognized Killian. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, rising to shake Killian's hand. "When I got your telegraph, I half expected you'd be dead before I could reply." "Takes more than a corrupt shopkeeper to put me under," Killian replied with a grin. "Good to see you, Jim." Harker's attention shifted to the others. "I see you've brought company," after introductions were made and Mrs. Chen's deed was presented. The marshal listened intently to their account of events in Willow Creek. His expression grew increasingly grave as Willow described the fire at the laundry and the subsequent attempt to evict them. "Land fraud, arson, attempted kidnapping of a minor," Harker summarized, scratching his graying beard. "Plus potential interference with a federal mail carrier if what you say about Dr. Garrett's letters is true." "It's all true," Willow insisted. Harker studied the deed carefully. "This appears legitimate. Wang Chen was indeed a naturalized citizen when he purchased the property." He looked up at Mrs. Chen. "Miller has no legal grounds to challenge your ownership." Relief flooded the elderly woman's face. "Can stop them, make them pay for fire." "That's exactly what we're going to do," Harker assured her. "I'll send deputies to Willow Creek tomorrow with warrants for Miller and the mayor." While this was welcome news, Killian had concerns. "Miller has influence in that town, Jim. Your deputies might face resistance." "They'll be prepared for that," the marshal replied confidently. "And they won't be alone. The railroad company has its own investigators looking into land fraud along the proposed routes. They don't take kindly to local officials manipulating property values." This was an unexpected ally. "The railroad is on our side?" Willow asked, surprised. "Not out of charity," Harker clarified. "But they prefer dealing with legitimate property owners rather than schemers like Miller. Honest business is more predictable than fraud." As they discussed the legal proceedings that would follow, Thomas and Lyon grew restless. Noticing this, Harker suggested they all move to his home for more comfortable accommodations. "My wife will be delighted to have guests," he assured them. "Especially children. Our own are grown and moved away." The marshal's home proved to be a spacious two-story house on the outskirts of town, with a well-tended garden and enough rooms to accommodate everyone comfortably. Martha Harker, a kind-faced woman with practical hands and a warm smile, welcomed them without hesitation. "Any friend of James is welcome here," she declared, immediately taking charge of Mrs. Chen's medical care and settling the children in the kitchen with fresh baked cookies. That evening, After a proper meal, the first they'd enjoyed since leaving Willow Creek, Killian and Harker sat on the porch, discussing the situation over glasses of whiskey. "What are your plans once this is settled?" the marshal asked. "Still heading to Montana." Killian nodded, watching the sunset paint the horizon in shades of gold and crimson. "That's the plan. Found a piece of land near the Gallatin Valley last year, been saving to claim it properly. And the Nash woman and her brother," Harker's tone was carefully neutral, "they're going with you." "If they choose to," Killian replied. "Thomas is eager for it. Willow." He paused, considering. "She has dreams of her own, medical school in Philadelphia." Harker raised an eyebrow. "Ambitious." "She has the skill for it. Her father was a doctor, trained her from childhood." "And where do you fit in these plans?" the marshal asked directly. Killian took a thoughtful sip of whiskey. "That's still being determined," Harker chuckled. "Never thought I'd see the day Killian Zane would settle down, especially with a woman bent on becoming a doctor. Times change." "People too." "That they do." Harker raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings, whatever shape they take." Inside the house, Willow was helping Martha clear the dinner dishes while keeping an eye on Thomas, who was teaching Lion to play checkers in the parlor. "Your brother is good with children," Martha observed. "Patient. That's rare in boys his age." "He's had to grow up quickly," Willow replied, drying a plate. "Our parents' deaths forced both of us to mature faster than we might have otherwise." Martha nodded sympathetically. "James mentioned you have medical aspirations. Is that still your plan?" Willow hesitated, glancing toward the porch where Killian sat with the marshal. "It's complicated now." "Because of Mr. Zane?" Martha asked perceptively. "Partly." Willow set down the dish towel. "I've always known what I wanted to follow in my father's footsteps, to help people through medicine. But now there's Thomas to consider and Killian." She trailed off, uncertain how to articulate the conflicting emotions she felt. Martha smiled gently. "The heart rarely follows a straight path, my dear, and the best journeys often involve unexpected detours." "What if the detour takes me away from my original destination?" Willow asked, voicing her deepest fear. "Or what if it leads you to a better one?" Martha countered. "One where you don't have to choose between your ambitions and your heart." This possibility that she might not have to sacrifice one dream for another was something Willow had scarcely allowed herself to consider. Her father had always encouraged her medical aspirations, but even he had assumed she would eventually have to choose between a career and a family. "I don't know if such a place exists," she said softly. "The West is still being shaped," Martha replied. "Its rules aren't as rigid as those back east. I've known women here who practice medicine, run businesses, own property in their own names." She patted Willow's hand. "Don't limit your vision to what's been done before. Think of what could be." These words stayed with Willow as she helped Thomas prepare for bed in the guest room they shared. Her brother, unusually contemplative, sat on the edge of his bed after washing up. "Willow," he began hesitantly, "do you like Killian?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. "Of course I do. He's helped us tremendously." Thomas rolled his eyes with the exasperation only a 14-year-old could muster. "Not like that. I mean, do you like him the way Ma liked Pa?" Willow felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thomas, that's hardly an appropriate question." "Why not?" "I've seen how you look at each other." He plucked at a loose thread on his blanket. "And I think it would be nice, having him around all the time, like family." The simple honesty of her brother's observation struck Willow deeply. Thomas had lost so much: both parents, their home, his childhood friends. It was natural that he would crave the stability of a complete family again. "It's not that simple," she said gently. "I have plans for medical school and Killian has his own dreams for Montana. But couldn't you do both?" Thomas persisted. Be a doctor and be with Killian, perhaps, she conceded, surprising herself with the admission. But these are adult matters, Thomas, and they take time to sort out. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. Just don't wait too long. Killian's a good man, and Pa always said good men are rare. Willow smiled, touched by her brother's concern. I'll keep that in mind. Now time for sleep. Tomorrow will be busy. After Thomas had fallen asleep, Willow found herself drawn to the window, gazing out at the star-filled sky. The conversation with Martha and Thomas had unsettled her, forcing her to confront feelings she'd been carefully holding at arm's length. She had spent the past year focused solely on survival, keeping Thomas safe, finding work, planning their journey to California. Romance had been the furthest thing from her mind. Yet in the span of a few days, Killian Zane had upended her carefully ordered priorities, introducing possibilities she hadn't dared to consider. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Opening it, she found Killian standing in the hallway, his expression serious. Sorry to disturb you, he said quietly, but Jim just received a telegraph from Willow Creek. Thought you should know immediately. Concern flooded through her. What's happened? Miller and the mayor have fled town. Apparently they got wind of the pending warrants and decided not to stick around. His expression softened slightly. But there's good news too. Dr. Garrett's letters reached the territorial governor, who's ordered an investigation into the entire affair. Relief washed over Willow. So it's over. They can't hurt us anymore. Not legally, Killian confirmed. They're fugitives now, which means they'll be more concerned with saving their own skins than pursuing vendettas. What about Mrs. Chen's property? The deed will be fully restored to her name. And there's talk of compensation for the laundry from the railroad company as a gesture of good faith to the Chinese community. This was better news than Willow had dared to hope for. She'll be able to rebuild, or perhaps join her family in San Francisco with some security. Killian nodded. Jim says we should all stay here for a few more days while the paperwork is processed. Then, he hesitated, watching her carefully. Then we'll need to decide what comes next. The moment stretched between them, laden with unspoken questions about their shared future. Killian, Willow began, uncertain how to express the tumult of emotions she was feeling. He raised a hand gently. No need to decide anything tonight. We have time now. His eyes met hers, warm and sincere. Whatever you choose, Willow, I want you to know that meeting you and Thomas has been unexpected, in the best possible way. Before she could respond, he wished her good night and continued down the hall to his own room, leaving Willow with a heart full of possibilities and a mind racing with plans that now, perhaps, didn't have to be mutually exclusive. The next few days in Cheyenne passed peacefully, a welcome respite after the tension and danger they had faced in Willow Creek. Mrs. Chen's leg improved steadily under Martha Harker's care, and the children flourished in the stable environment of the Marshalls' home. On the third day, Marshal Harker returned from his office with news that Miller and the mayor had been apprehended attempting to cross into New Mexico territory. They would be returned to Wyoming to face charges of fraud, arson, and conspiracy. It's truly over, Willow said that evening as she and Killian walked in the Harkers' garden after dinner. I can hardly believe it. Believe it, Killian encouraged. You're free to move forward now without looking over your shoulder. She glanced at him. We all are. He nodded, stopping beside a rose arbor that Martha tended with pride. Which brings us to the question of where that forward leads. Willow took a deep breath, having spent much of the past days considering this very question. I've been thinking about that, about Montana and Philadelphia and everything in between. And, he prompted gently when she paused, I want to pursue my medical training, she stated firmly. It's not just a whim or a way to honor my father. It's who I am, who I'm meant to be." Killian nodded, his expression revealing nothing of his own feelings. "I understand. But," she continued, meeting his gaze directly, "I've also come to realize that there might be a way to honor that calling without sacrificing. Other possibilities." Hope flickered in his eyes. "What did you have in mind?" "Thomas needs stability, a home. He's thrived these past days, having a proper place to stay, regular meals, people who care about him." She smiled softly. "Including you." "He's a fine boy," Killian agreed. "Going to be a good man someday soon." "Yes, he is. And he needs the kind of environment you've described in Montana: open spaces, honest work, a chance to grow without the shadows of the past hanging over him." Willow took another deep breath. "So I was thinking, perhaps we could go to Montana as planned, establish that home for Thomas. And then, when he's settled, I could pursue my medical studies." Killian considered this. "Philadelphia is a long way from Montana." "It is," she acknowledged, "but there are other options, Dr. Garrett mentioned that the university in Denver has begun accepting a limited number of female students in their medical program. It's not as established as the women's college in Philadelphia, but it's much closer to Montana," Killian finished, understanding dawning in his expression. Willow nodded. "Close enough that I could return regularly, be part of Thomas's life and yours while still pursuing my education." "That sounds like a reasonable compromise," Killian said carefully, though she could see he was holding back stronger emotions. "It's not just a compromise," she corrected, taking a step closer to him. "It's a beginning, one I'd like to share with you if you're still offering." The restraint in his expression gave way to a warmth that reached his eyes. "I'm offering more than that, Willow, if you'll have it." He took her hands in his touch gentle but sure. "I know we've known each other only a short time, but in that time, I've seen your courage, your intelligence, your devotion to those you care about. I've watched you face danger and hardship without flinching, always putting others before yourself." Willow felt her heart quicken as she recognized the direction his words were taking. "I'm not asking you to give up your dreams," Killian continued earnestly. "I'm asking to be part of them. To build something together that honors both our paths." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I don't have much to offer except my word and my work, but if that's enough, I'd like to court you properly, with the intention of making you my wife when the time is right." The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. This wasn't a hasty proposal born of convenience or necessity, but a thoughtful invitation to a shared future, one that acknowledged her ambitions rather than asking her to abandon them. "Your word and your work are worth more than gold to me," she replied softly. "And yes, I would like that very much." The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual, then brilliant. Without words, he drew her gently into his arms, giving her every opportunity to step away if she wished. Instead, Willow moved closer, tilting her face up to his. Their first kiss was tender, a promise exchanged without words, a beginning rather than a culmination. When they parted, Killian kept her hands in his. "We should tell Thomas," he suggested. "He's been dropping hints about this possibility since we left Willow Creek." Willow laughed, the sound light and free in a way it hadn't been for a very long time. "He'll be insufferably pleased with himself." "As well he should be," Killian replied with a grin. "The boy has good judgment." Together they walked back toward the house, their steps perfectly matched, their future taking shape with each shared moment. The following week brought both closure and new beginnings. Mrs. Chen received official confirmation of her property rights, along with a substantial settlement from the railroad company that would allow her to either rebuild in Willow Creek or establish a new business near her family in San Francisco. She chose the latter, expressing tearful gratitude to Willow and Killian for their help. "You good people," she told them on the day she and Lion departed for California. "Have strong hearts, make good family." Thomas, who had grown quite attached to Lion, extracted a promise from the younger boy to write letters once he was old enough. "And maybe someday you can visit us in Montana," he added hopefully. Marshall Harker provided Killian with detailed maps of the Gallatin Valley and letters of introduction to several influential ranchers in the area. "Land still available for those willing to work it," he confirmed. And with the northern Pacific pushing westward, cattle prices should remain strong for years to come. Martha Harker took Willow under her wing, helping her prepare for the journey north and offering practical advice about establishing a home in frontier territory. "It won't be easy," she warned. "Winters are harsh, and amenities we take for granted here might be scarce." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Willow assured her, "and I've learned to appreciate simple comforts all the more for their rarity." On their final evening in Cheyenne, Killian presented Willow with a small wooden box. "It's not much," he said as she opened it, "but I wanted you to have something to mark our understanding." Inside lay a delicate silver locket on a slender chain. When Willow opened it, she found a tiny pressed flower, a wild rose, its color still vibrant despite being dried. "It's beautiful," she breathed, touching it gently. "Found it growing near where we camped that first night after leaving Willow Creek," Killian explained. "Seemed fitting somehow, beauty surviving in difficult circumstances." Willow's eyes glistened with emotion as she allowed him to fasten the chain around her neck. The locket rested just below her collarbone, a tangible symbol of promises made and a future awaiting them. "Thank you," she said simply, words inadequate to express the fullness of her heart. Their journey to Montana took nearly 3 weeks, following the newly established stage routes north from Cheyenne. The late summer weather held fair, making the travel as comfortable as possible in the wagon Killian had purchased with part of his savings. Thomas thrived during the journey, eagerly absorbing Killian's knowledge of the land, animals, and survival skills necessary for frontier life. His health continued to improve, the lingering weakness from his illness giving way to the natural vigor of youth. Willow, too, found herself enjoying the journey more than she had anticipated. The vast, open landscapes of Wyoming and Montana territories spoke to something in her soul that responded to their untamed beauty. Each sunset painted the sky in colors no artist could capture. Each dawn brought new vistas to explore. And through it all, her relationship with Killian deepened. Their courtship progressed with a natural ease that belied the brevity of their acquaintance. They learned each other's stories, discovered shared values, and built a foundation of mutual respect that promised to withstand whatever challenges lay ahead. When they finally reached the Gallatin Valley in early October, the aspens were turning gold against the evergreen backdrop of the surrounding mountains. The land Killian had described to Willow exceeded her expectations, a rolling expanse of meadows bordered by a clear, swift creek, with timber on the northern boundary, and a view of snow-capped peaks to the west. "This is it," Killian said as they stood together on a small rise overlooking what would become their homestead. "What do you think?" Willow surveyed the land, trying to envision the home they would build, the garden she would plant, the life they would create together. "It's perfect," she said honestly. "I can see why you set your heart on this place." Thomas, who had been exploring the creek, came running back with excited reports of fish as long as my arm and a family of otters he'd spotted playing near a bend in the water. "Can we build the house right here?" he asked, pointing to the rise where they stood. "So we can see everything," Killian nodded, pleased by the boy's enthusiasm. That's exactly what I was thinking. Good spot for a house high enough to avoid spring flooding, sheltered from the north wind by those trees, and a view worth waking up to every morning. They made camp that first night on their own land, planning by firelight the work that would need to be done before winter set in. The nearest town, Bozeman, was a day's ride away, small but growing, with basic supplies available and a community that welcomed newcomers with practical skills to contribute. The most urgent task is shelter, Killian explained. We can start with a cabin, one room to get us through the winter, then expand in the spring. What about the cattle? Thomas asked. When will they arrive? Not until spring, Killian replied. We'll need proper corrals and winter feed before bringing stock onto the land. But there's a rancher about 10 miles east who's offered me work helping with his herd until then. That will provide income while we get established. Willow listened to their discussion, offering suggestions and asking practical questions. The enormity of what they were undertaking was daunting, but also exhilarating. This land, wild, beautiful, and full of potential, would be their home. The place where Thomas would grow to manhood, where she and Killian would build a life together. Work began the very next day. With the help of neighbors who understood the importance of community in frontier survival, the cabin took shape over the following weeks. Logs were cut, notched, and fitted together. A stone fireplace was constructed. Windows were framed with glass panes transported carefully from Bozeman. Willow threw herself into the labor alongside Killian and Thomas, learning new skills and adapting old ones to their circumstances. Her medical knowledge proved valuable beyond treating the occasional injuries that occurred during construction. She identified useful wild plants for food and medicine, prepared herbal remedies to ward off winter illness, and quickly became known among the scattered homesteads as someone to call when medical attention was needed. By the time the first snow fell in late November, the cabin was complete, snug, solid, and surprisingly comfortable with the handcrafted furniture Killian had made during the evenings. A small barn housed their horses and the 2 milk cows they had purchased from a neighboring ranch. Their first winter in Montana tested them in ways they had anticipated and others they had not. The cold was more intense than Willow had experienced before, the isolation more profound when snow made travel difficult. Yet these challenges only strengthened the bonds between them, forging a partnership that drew on each person's strengths. Thomas proved remarkably adaptable, dividing his time between helping with chores, studying with the books Willow had brought, and exploring their land whenever weather permitted. By spring, he had grown several inches and developed a quiet confidence that reminded Willow of their father. Killian worked tirelessly, splitting his time between their homestead and the neighboring ranch, where he earned both money and practical knowledge about raising cattle in this demanding environment. Despite the physical demands of this life, he found time each evening to sit with Willow near the fire, discussing the day's events, planning for the future, and gradually exploring the deepening feelings between them. Their courtship progressed with a measured pace that respected the significance of the commitment they were considering. Killian was unfailingly patient, never pressuring Willow for more than she was ready to give, always mindful of Thomas's presence and the example they set for him. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers across the meadows and renewed energy for the work ahead. The cabin was expanded to include a separate bedroom for Thomas and a small space Willow, designated as her surgery, a clean, organized area for treating patients and preparing medicines. In May, Killian traveled to Bozeman to meet a cattle drive coming up from Wyoming. He returned leading 20 head of sturdy Hereford cattle, the beginning of their herd and their future prosperity. As summer approached, bringing with it the first anniversary of their meeting in Willow Creek, Killian asked Willow to ride with him to a special spot he had discovered on their land, a small pond fed by a natural spring, surrounded by cottonwoods and wild roses now in full bloom. "It reminds me of that first camp we made after leaving town," he said as they dismounted. "Remember, when you were so worried about what the future might hold?" Willow smiled, touching the silver locket she still wore daily. "I remember. Everything seemed so uncertain then. And now?" He took her hands in his expression earnest. "Now I know we made the right choice," she replied softly. "All of us." Killian nodded, drawing her slightly closer. "I've been thinking about choices, Willow, about promises made and kept." From his pocket he produced a simple gold band. "I promised to court you properly, with the intention of making you my wife when the time was right." His eyes held hers steadily. "I believe that time has come, if you feel the same." Willow looked at the ring, then at the man holding it, this steady, honorable man who had changed the course of her life with a simple act of kindness in a frontier market, who had supported her dreams rather than asking her to abandon them, who had become, in the span of a year, the partner she hadn't known she was seeking. "I do feel the same," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, Killian, I will be your wife." His smile was brilliant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "I had this made in Bozeman last month. The goldsmith thought I was crazy, asking for such a plain design." "It's perfect," Willow assured him, admiring the simple elegance of the band. "Anything more elaborate would only get in the way of my work." Killian laughed, pulling her into a proper embrace. "That's exactly what I told him. Said my future wife was a practical woman with important work to do." Their kiss sealed the promise between them, not the first they had shared, but significant in its confirmation of the path they had chosen together. The wedding took place in July, a simple ceremony performed by a circuit riding minister who visited the scattered homesteads every few months. Neighbors from miles around gathered to celebrate, bringing food, music, and handmade gifts for the couple who had quickly become valued members of the community. Thomas, beaming with pride, stood as Killian's best man. Dr. Garrett, who had relocated to Denver after the events in Willow Creek, made the journey north to give Willow away in her father's stead. "He would be immensely proud of you," the doctor told her as they prepared to enter the flower-decorated barn where the ceremony would take place. "Not just for your medical work, which continues to impress me, but for the family you've created here." Willow squeezed his arm gratefully. "Thank you for helping make this possible, for supporting my ambitions when so few would." Garrett smiled. "Speaking of which, I've brought news from Denver. The medical program has reviewed your application and supporting materials. They're prepared to offer you a place in next year's entering class." Joy surged through Willow. "Truly, even with my unconventional background, your background is precisely what impressed them," Garrett assured her. "Your practical experience exceeds that of most first-year students, and your arrangements to study intensively during the academic terms, then return home for the summers, satisfy their concerns about your family commitments." It was the culmination of a dream Willow had carried since childhood, official recognition of her abilities, and a path to the formal education she had always sought. That it could be achieved while maintaining her connection to the home and family she had built with Killian and Thomas made the news all the sweeter. As she walked toward Killian, who waited with quiet joy in his eyes, Willow felt a profound sense of rightness. Their journey together had begun with an act of courage and kindness in a hostile environment. It had continued through danger and uncertainty, always strengthened by mutual respect and growing love. Now, as they joined hands before their gathered community, they were embarking on a new chapter, one that honored both their shared values and their individual dreams. I, Killian, take you, Willow. The traditional vows took on deeper meaning when spoken by a man whose actions had consistently demonstrated the commitment his words now formalized. I, Willow, take you, Killian. Her response came from a heart full of gratitude for the unexpected turn her life had taken that day in the market, when a stranger had stood beside her in her moment of shame and said those transformative words, "She's mine now." Except it hadn't been about possession, she realized as they exchanged rings. It had been about protection, about creating a space where she could stand tall and pursue her own path. Killian had never sought to own her, only to walk beside her. After the ceremony, as their neighbors congratulated them and prepared for the celebration that would continue well into the night, Thomas approached with a small wooden box. "I made this for you both," he said, presenting it proudly, "with help from Mr. Jensen next door." Inside lay two meticulously carved figures, a man and a woman standing side by side, their hands joined. The details were simple but expressive, capturing something essential about both Killian and Willow. "It's beautiful, Thomas," Willow said, deeply touched by her brother's gift. "You've become quite the craftsman." "Mr. Jensen says I have a natural talent," the boy replied, straightening under the praise. "He's teaching me about different woods and tools." Killian clapped him on the shoulder. "It's a gift we'll treasure always. Thank you, son." The word son brought a special light to Thomas's eyes. Though nothing in their relationship had formally changed with the wedding, Killian had been a father figure to him for months. The acknowledgement clearly meant a great deal to the boy. As the celebration continued around them, Willow found a moment to share Dr. Garrett's news with Killian. "Denver," he repeated, his expression warming with genuine pleasure for her. "That's wonderful news, Willow. When would you start?" "Next September," she replied. "Nearly a year from now." "Time enough to ensure everything here is well established," he nodded thoughtfully. "We'll make it work. The ranch, your studies, all of it." His eyes held hers with absolute certainty. "Whatever it takes." In that moment, surrounded by the community they had joined, with Thomas nearby and their future stretching before them full of both challenges and possibilities, Willow knew without doubt that she had found her place in the world, not just a physical location, but a state of being where she was valued for exactly who she was. The path ahead would not be easy. Balancing her medical studies with her responsibilities as a wife, sister, and eventually, she hoped, a mother, would require dedication and sacrifice. Building a successful ranch in this beautiful but demanding environment would test all their skills and determination. But as Killian drew her into the center of the barn for their first dance as husband and wife, Willow was certain of one thing. Whatever challenges came, they would face them together, with the same courage and compassion that had brought them to this moment. And that was a future worth building, one day at a time.